Hey guys, I hope you're all doing well and cracking on with all your own property investment plans despite all of this doom and gloom about Brexit, Section 24, the impending nuclear war that's going to wipe us all off the face of this planet. We are certainly keeping ourselves busy. We've got about 23 HMO rooms hitting the market in the next couple of months. We've got a dozen single lets on the go. Our projects are certainly not slowing down. And honestly, despite all of the legislation changes that are coming in and that people are scared about and worried about and don't really understand, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be cracking on at full pace. And one of those particular pieces of legislation I want to touch on today is surrounding HMO licensing, because there is so much misunderstood or misinformation out there. It's a really simple concept and it should just take us 2 minutes to clarify it, but hopefully it gives you a bit of peace of mind that you're moving in the right direction, doing the right things, and that in actual fact you don't need to be massively worried about it. What I'm talking about here are the HMO licensing changes that come into effect on the 1st of October this year, 2018. So if you're watching this pre-1st of October, you've still got time to act. If you're watching it post-1st of October 2018, then make sure that you're fully compliant with everything that I'm about to discuss. So this change has been on the cards for quite a while. We first discussed it on the 24th of February. I think it was signed as an Act of Parliament on the 23rd of February this year. It's the House of Multiple Occupation Licensing Prescribed Order 2018 or something along the lines of that. I'll post a link below if you want to read all of the sort of official government documentation on it. But basically people are getting their knickers in a twist about it, and frankly I don't really see any need to be. So prior to the 1st of October, so for the next 2 weeks, if you're watching this on the day it's released, you need a mandatory license on an HMO if it meets 3 criteria. If there are 5 or more people living in the accommodation, if the accommodation is 3 or more stories, and if it forms 2 or more households. So basically if it's a single family of 6 people, it doesn't come into it, but if those 5 or more people form 2 separate households, then it would be included. You need to meet all 3 of those criteria for a mandatory license to be required. As of the 1st of October, the only change that is coming in is to the number of stories. So no longer will it need to be 3 or more stories. The new licensing will be applicable to any property regardless of the number of stories. So if it goes down to 2 stories, it still needs a license. If it goes down to 1 story, it still needs a license, so long as there are 5 or more people forming 2 or more households living there. So if that's the only difference to licensing, how does it impact you and what exactly do you need to do? Well, the good news is if you had a license on your property prior to the 1st of October and it has not expired yet, you do not need to do anything until that license expires. And because it is already licensed, you would just do as you would do anyway when that license does expire. You go to your council, you apply for a new license, job done. Where there's a little bit of uncertainty is what exactly you need to do if you were currently managing a previously unlicensed property that will be licensable under the new regulations. And this is quite important. If you are operating such a property, so you need to be aware of this, so 5 or more people forming 2 or more households across any number of stories, then you will need to apply for a license. Your house will be licensable from the 1st of October. And the important thing is you need to have your application for this license submitted before the 1st of October, which means you've only got a couple of weeks to get this application submitted. Now, it's not a complicated process. You should be able to go to the housing standards or the HMO specific section of your local council website, download the application form, try to understand what the fee is, and get that submitted. It will likely be pages and pages and pages and pages and pages long, but it is nothing that you shouldn't already know about your property. So there's really no excuse not to do this. If you know that your property is going to be licensable from the 1st of October, please, please, please make sure that you get this license application submitted beforehand. Because if you don't, there are fines that can be imposed on you, and those fines are pretty hefty. Obviously, if you're in the process of creating an HMO that will fit the new license requirements, or you decide to do so at some point in the future, then it's just a case of applying for that license once the project is complete. But the real priority here is for people who are managing properties that are not currently licensable that will be from the 1st of October. I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but I really need to stress the point. You need to get your application in ASAP. It's super important to keep in mind that planning is different from licensing, and whilst that's not directly applicable to what we're talking about today, it is always relevant and necessary to repeat this because people get them confused and forget the differences so often. So just because your property doesn't need planning permission doesn't necessarily mean that it will not be licensable. In fact, as I've said, the two things are completely separate. Typically for an HMO, you'll need planning if you have got 7 or more occupants, if you have got a commercial building that you're converting into residential, or if you are converting an existing C3 residential dwelling into C4 in an area where it is not permitted development. So an Article 4 area would be a great example of this, where the permitted development rights have been removed on all C3 to C4 conversions, or in some conservation areas where they've also removed those same permitted development rights. Keep this in mind that planning is completely different from licensing, so do not get the two mixed up. And finally, the last thing you need to keep in mind is that mandatory licensing is different to two other types of licensing: selective licensing and additional licensing. This is where it does all start to get a little bit confusing, but bear with me because, again, at the core of it, it is pretty simple to understand. So mandatory licensing is prescribed by government, and as I've said umpteen times already, as of the 1st of October, it is going to apply to all HMOs that have 5 or more occupants making up 2 or more households over any number of stories in the property, so even a single story building. That is mandatory licensing, and that is what we need to be mindful of come the 1st of October. Two other things that are in effect though: additional licensing. Now this is where a local council can introduce licensing on any HMO regardless of whether it meets the licensing HMO test. So it could be any number of occupants across any number of floors. So if you've got 3 or 4 people sharing a house, you would also need to apply for a license. This is done on a council by council or borough by borough basis, so check with your local council as you're doing your development project to understand if you need additional licensing. And finally, selective licensing isn't specific to HMOs. This is where councils have put in a licensing scheme across all rental properties to try and manage the quality and the condition of those rental properties. So if there's selective licensing in place in your council or borough area, you will need to apply for a license regardless of whether your property is an HMO or not. Again, dead simple to check with your local council. And obviously my dogs aren't a massive fan of selective or additional licensing. I can't blame them, frankly, but as I said, it's actually pretty easy to understand. Hopefully that all makes sense, and if I can say one thing, it is really just pay attention to that 1st of October deadline, because it is looming. Don't be a trouble causer like Douglas here. Get your license application submitted early, avoid any fines, and be the good HMO landlord that I know you want to be.